I'm Sean Spruce, host of Native America Calling. The meaningful conversations you hear on our public radio program connect and amplify Native voices nationwide. Your gift can keep these voices strong. Please go to NativeAmericaCalling.com and select Donate to make a gift today. Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. St. Paul, Minnesota is renaming an urban park to reflect its importance to Dakota people. The new name is also part of reworking the space to better reflect the needs of the current Native inhabitants and their ancestors. We'll hear about that effort and also check in with people working to recognize places important to Native Hawaiians in the process to rebuild Lahaina, Hawaii after that city's devastating fire in 2023. That's all coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The U.S. Supreme Court will not reconsider the nonprofit Apache Stronghold's effort to preserve sacred lands from a massive copper mining project east of Phoenix, Arizona. The justices Monday declined to revisit an earlier decision to throw out the case for a second and final time. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrazio has more.
Court records show conservative Neil Gorsuch stands alone in supporting the nonprofit's plea. Justice Clarence Thomas previously joined him in co-authoring a May dissent. Recusing himself once more was Samuel Alito, who has disclosed stock holdings in BHP, the Australian-based minority partner behind Resolution Copper. In a statement, Resolution Copper told KJZZ it's pleased the court upheld a split Ninth Circuit ruling that Oak Flat is not subject to religious freedom protections. While on social media, Apache Stronghold says it's deeply disappointing that Mother Earth's voice goes unheard yet again. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrazio.
Last week, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians held a grand opening for its latest off-reservation housing development in Salem, Oregon. The site is a mixed-income living facility with 39 units. Brian Bull of Buffalo's Fire reports.
An honor song and ribbon cutting officially opened the Cloche Ilahi Haas complex. About 60 people attended the ceremony, including tribal member Vera Vasquez. The working mother of three explored the 2- and 4-bedroom units, excited for the next day when she'd move in with her family from their much smaller home.
This is changing my life. We've been literally bursting at the seams in our 2 bedrooms, so it's just going to be really nice to have space. And what I'm really looking forward to, though, is having the community and the garden and the tribal activities. Our kids can play and grow up together, and we can really connect as people.
Tribal officials say Native people in Oregon experience homelessness 4 times more than other demographics. And Salem has the second highest population of Siletz citizens next to the tribal headquarters and reservation area. Many left for cities and coastal industries after Congress terminated the tribe's federal status in 1954. Even after being reinstated in 1977, many Siletz people stayed in those areas. Tribal Chair Dee Pigsley says they're also looking at the city of Eugene.
They've all been really tough areas to provide housing because we don't own land there. We have to buy the land, and it's land that comes at a premium. And then we have to find money to build the homes.
The Cloche Ilahi Haas complex cost $17 million. Half of that was covered by an Indian Housing Block Grant, while the tribe covered the rest. For National Native News, I'm Brian Bull in Salem, Oregon.
The Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in Oklahoma, in partnership with the U.S. Army, have begun the process of returning 16 children home from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. In a press release Monday, the tribe said it's a solemn and historic undertaking more than 2 years in the making. The disinterment began in September at the Carlisle Cemetery. The tribe say the month-long project represents a moment of healing and remembrance, carried out with descendant ceremonial leaders, tribal officials, forensic experts, and Army representatives. The children will be reinterred on tribal land in Concho, Oklahoma. 11 Cheyenne and 5 Arapaho children who passed away while attending the school are returning home. 13 were under the age of 18. The federal school opened in 1879. Native children were forced to assimilate and were trained in various trades. According to the tribes, the repatriation marks an important step toward justice and healing for the families and tribal nations impacted by the boarding school era. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. After years of restoration work, a city park in St. Paul, Minnesota is getting a whole new look and a public message that reflects the land's ongoing importance to Dakota people. The site, once known as Indian Mounds Park, will also get a new Dakota name. It's a recognition by city officials that sacred land deserves to be protected from pressures of urban encroachment. St. Louis, Missouri officials have also just completed a land transfer of a mound site to the Osage Nation in the city's first ever official recognition of tribal sovereignty. And in Lahaina, Hawaii, dozens of local residents are working to restore and preserve sacred and cultural sites following a devastating fire that tore through the city and surrounding land in 2023. Today we'll talk about the work to recognize and preserve sacred places in population centers. Of course, listeners, you can join us. Just call 1-800-996-2848, 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE to join today's conversation. Joining us now from St. Paul, Minnesota is Maggie Lorenz. She's the executive director of Wakantipi Agwangapi. She is from the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation, and she's also an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. Maggie, hello. Welcome to Native America Calling.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Joining us from Lahaina in Hawaii is Ke'aumoku Kapu. He is the executive director of Nakani o Maui and the cultural specialist for Lahaina Town. He is Native Hawaiian. Ke'aumoku, good morning.
Hi, aloha.
Aloha to you as well.
Good morning. Aloha.
Great to have you on the show. Maggie, I want to begin with you. This park in St. Paul, Minnesota, very exciting. What's the new name? And tell us more about the importance of having the Dakota language represented there.
Yeah, so there are actually two adjacent parcels of land that are owned by the city of St. Paul that were established as parks for the city. One was Indian Mounds Regional Park, which was is 111 acre.
Okay. I'm sorry, Maggie. You know what? We're going to work on your audio just for a minute to get you squared away. In the meantime, Ke'aumoku, I'd like to go to you now, and let's talk about the fires. It's been 2 years now in which many lives were lost. Also, much of the town of Lahaina was destroyed. Can you tell us more? What cultural sites and structures were impacted?
Lahaina was designated on the National Historic Registry in 1961, 1962. They identified 14 historical properties that were really important, and sad to say we lost them all. So the restoration process is going to take a while once we get the adequate permitting, because a lot of things changed. There are new SMA rules. Our town is basically leveled, so we have to look at ways on how we can improve that National Historic Registry, knowing that nothing is here. So we're working diligently, long and hard, finding out ways on how we can collaborate with residences as well as the commercial entities to figure out ways on how we can bring our town back.
14 historical sites, all of them destroyed. This just sounds like an awful lot of work, a lot of planning and execution. Tell us more about just the enormity of this task and some of the steps along the way.
Yeah, sure. Just days right after the fire, Nye County, O'Malley, our organization is a 501c3 nonprofit Native Hawaiian organization. We enacted to start up distribution hub to cater to a lot of our community. When everything happened, I would say probably about a week after, all the hotels in Ka'anapali opened their doors and housed pretty close over 8,000, 9,000 plus people that lost their homes. So the hotel industry really kicked in. We, Nye County, O'Malley, started off one of the biggest distribution hubs where we provided food, water, necessities. Then, right after that, within, I would say, a couple of weeks, we were approached by the county as well as the state if we would be the ones to take on the cultural monitoring and observations of the Lahaina disaster when it came to the recovery efforts. So Nye County, O'Malley stepped it up. We were under a total of simultaneously 5 federal contracts to help alleviate a lot of the issues and problems when it came to the protection of the integrity of our town. So Nye County, O'Malley, with an employment of only 10 people, we had to step it up, and we hired 82 monitors within Lahaina town that lost homes and also lost families too. So the work that we've been doing, and we're still on the field still today, the work that we're doing is we lighten the load for the archaeologist when the archaeologist comes in to do the debris removal. So our job is to identify historical walls, possible family burials. I mean, sky is the limit because we know the lay of the land, we know the people of the community, and I think it was great to have that being a part of the cleanup efforts, because the community was pretty agitated knowing that, you know, you had the military, you had the federal government, you had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers coming in. So it gave us an opportunity to sit at the table to talk about ways on how we can improve the relationship between our residences that lost homes and how we can be a medium between the federal government and the government, our existing government, like the county and the state. So we've been in from day one. We're going on since August of 2023, and we're looking at the possibility of this town not even coming back within, I would say, maybe the next 5 years, probably even longer than that.
So that's the timeline then, 5 years roughly since August 2023. That was 2 years ago. So really like a 7-year time frame since the fire until you hope to have the rebuilding where you want it to be. Tell us a little bit more about just some of the challenges here with regard to any pressures that you're facing with these rebuilding projects, and even just maybe logistically, like just, I mean, some of these very, very important cultural sites that might date back many, many years. What all does that take?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people need to understand throughout the world that Lahaina is the capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii. So that is one of the main reasons and the most important reason as to how we need to literally collaborate with other organizations on the possibility of bringing those iconic eras back. The palace that was situated here, which was the Constitutional Monarchy Palace. The courthouse was another area. The courthouse made the restoration project, and the courthouse was built by the Crown. It was built by the King. It was a constitutional courthouse. And lo and behold, they turned the courthouse into the U.S. Post Office. So our town literally disappeared. But now that the fire had happened, I think it gives us an opportunity to, you know, I like to say this, and it makes people nervous, to push the reset button on ways on how we can improve the integrity, the dignity, the character of our town, because we were erased. So the fire, lo and behold, brought out a lot of those things that we've been pending on for a long time, especially for myself as a native Hawaiian, on how we need to improve the standings of our people, of our Kanaka Maoli, politically, spiritually, physically, and that's what we've been doing from day one. We've collaborated with different groups and organizations throughout the state and the possibility of them helping us, because right now the problem is because of the new administration. Under the Trump administration, things are changing a lot, and we're afraid that a lot of the federal funding that was provided for long-term housing for our people might get cut.
Okay.
And yeah, so there's a lot of things that we're concerned about. There's micro homes being placed all over the place, and long-term housing for families that can't return home because of insurance and all these kinds of things. So we're right in the middle of a catastrophic. I'd say that because it's going to be a while to try to figure these things out.
Mm-hmm.
But we're committed, we're dedicated, we'll do whatever we need to do.
You mentioned the importance of improving the standing of your people, and I know that the tourism industry there in Lahaina has a lot of power, a lot of money. What about those folks? Have you encountered any challenges just there on the ground with other economic development interests or business interests that might give you some pushback on any of this stuff?
No, actually, now is the time that not just people of the land, but everybody who decides to live here, now is the time to come together. Now to look at the possibilities on how we need to work together to figure out solutions, because we're in it for the long haul. And a lot of things that have been going on, especially for the long-term housing, our residences are kind of worried that although they can't not yet build their home because of permitting and laws have changed here in Maui, well, I would say the state of Hawaii, when it comes to climate change, a lot of our shorelines, so buildings that were built over the ocean, they can't build back.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the new SMA rules, floodplain, shoreline, everything is getting pushed back.
All right. We're going to take our first break here. We got the phone lines open for listeners who would like to join our conversation. 1-800-99-NATIVE. U.S. foreign aid to places like the Amazon are about more than helping indigenous cultures thrive. It also provided incentive for farmers to grow crops other than raw ingredients for cocaine. We'll discuss consequences of the Trump administration ending foreign aid to indigenous people on the next Native America Calling.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, gift shop discounts, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We were talking about protecting and preserving cultural sites in urban areas. Is there land in a city near you that's considered sacred or culturally important to a tribal nation? Tell us about it, what it means to have access to that space today. We're at 1-800-996-2848. That number's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. The phone lines are open. Give us a call. We'll get your comments on the air. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's go back now to Maggie Lorenz in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Maggie, before break, you were beginning to tell us about the new name for this park in St. Paul and its importance of having the Dakota language represented there. Please continue with your train of thought.
Yeah, I hope you all can hear me better now. But yeah, the site that I was starting to talk about is actually two city parks designated as parks in the city. One was known as Indian Mounds Regional Park, which was 111 acres of land at the top of a sandstone bluff overlooking the Mississippi River right in St. Paul here. And right at the base of the bluff was another 27-acre site known as Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary. But both of these two city parks contained, really culturally important resources and sacred sites. And so over the past, 5, 6, 7 years, we've been working with the city of St. Paul and the local Dakota tribes here in Minnesota to really come up with some planning around how do we kind of restore to the community and to the land that honor and respect for these places as sacred sites, and try to change that narrative that these are not, parks for recreating. So, in this past year, major accomplishment in renaming both of these sites. The Indian Mounds Regional Park was renamed Wichahapi, which in Dakota is cemetery. And then at the base of the bluff, the 27-acre Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary was renamed to Wakantipi, which is its historic name, which is essentially translates to, the place where something sacred lives or dwells.
Okay. In the 27 acres at the base there, that park carried the name of a former now deceased congressman by the name of Bruce Vento, as you pointed out. Tell us a little bit more about that situation, and was there any pushback with regard to his family or any representatives of his estate?
Yeah, so, this was a really delicate, I think, subject in terms of changing a name because, a lot of times in urban areas, especially when name changes happen, it's because they're trying to replace a name that is, inappropriate or offensive somehow, which was not the case here. Congressman Bruce Vento was well loved by so many people and did so much for our environment and the community here. So, it was really just, I think, when the park was named, it was shortly after his passing. And he did a lot of work to help support the restoration of that land. And so it was, kind of in an era, I guess, also where, things have changed a lot just in the past 20 years in terms of recognizing Native people and Native sovereignty, really allowing for Native people to even just have a seat at the table or have a voice in kind of discussions around land in urban areas. So I just, I think that we did the best we could to try to, share that information with the family. It wasn't about replacing his name, but restoring the name of the site to its name that it had for time immemorial here for Native people, and kind of restoring that recognition that this is a sacred place. And so the family that we spoke with were in support of this, and we really didn't get a lot of pushback. There were some community members who were a little jarred by it until they learned that this is something that was not going unsupported by the family. So.
Now, Maggie, you stressed earlier that these parks, these are not traditionally what we would think of as recreational spaces. However, I think a lot of times when people think of parks, they do think of recreation, right? They think of picnic grounds. They think of places to go maybe get in a canoe and go in a river or something like that. So tell us more about just that process for getting city officials to recognize the significance of these spaces from a non-recreational perspective.
Right. It's really interesting. There are two totally different tracks, even though this land is connected. They're literally adjoining one another. And from a Dakota perspective, this is one sacred site with with the burial mounds at the top of the bluff and a sacred cave site where ceremonies have been held for millennia at the base of the bluff, but again, established as 2 city parks. And so the way that the city kind of started along this path of recognizing these places was really there were 2 tracks, one for each park space, I guess. So the organization that I work for, Wakhanti Biawayankapi, was formerly known as Lower Phelan Creek Project, and it was a non-native led, like Friends of type group, and was doing the work to restore the land at the base of the bluff. And ultimately that group decided it really should turn itself over to Native leadership after it started learning more about the cultural history of the site. And that's kind of when I became involved in 2018, 2019. And so it was kind of through that process of that organization turning itself over to Native leadership and the, concept that they were kind of developing around building a cultural center at the site to help educate the public about the land. That's kind of the process that the city started, supporting that kind of reframing for Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary as a sacred site. And at the same time, there was a process up at Indian Mounds Regional Park at the top of the bluff where there was a kind of master plan for the park itself and the different amenities that were going to be added. And there was a splash pad that was going to be installed at that park. And it was actually a community member, another Dakota woman who, I've known and for a long time, named Crystal Norcross, and she's the one that actually stepped in and said, there really shouldn't be more amenities added to this park, and, was tribal consultation done and started raising a lot of questions. And at the time she was on the neighborhood council. And so because of that, they started engaging tribes around that project. And that really kind of changed the way and the direction that project went. So it was really 2 different kind of efforts that, went into the city ultimately kind of changing direction or changing course. And now we're kind of starting to get to the place where we're viewing both of these, parks as one sacred landscape. And in fact, both sites have also been redesignated to a cultural landscape under the name Imanijaska, which means White Bluff, which is the traditional Dakota name for St. Paul.
Of course, the Twin Cities have a very large and influential Native American urban population. It sounds like a lot of community members have been involved in this effort, Maggie. And I understand that Native youth are part of the process too. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of people who have been part of the work to, restore the land, restore the name, restore just the narrative around this. Our youth have been really critical in supporting the work that we're doing here too. And so we've definitely had Native youth from the local Indian Ed programs come down to the site to restore and plant culturally specific and culturally important plants that have been really important for our Native youth to be part of. So they've been planting like prairie sage and sweetgrass and red osier dogwood, which is also called chanshasha for Dakota people. It's a really important plant that we use for ceremonial purposes. So a lot of those culturally important plants have been placed there by Native youth in the community.
Mm-hmm. Sounds wonderful. And Maggie, I feel like one of the challenges here with regard to sacred spaces, it's wonderful to get the designation, it's wonderful to get the acknowledgement, but at some point, I would imagine there might be some level of enforcement that's needed, right? I mean, what's to keep people from still going into the park and using it as a recreational space, or just not being respectful and mindful of the history and culture that is there? How do you approach that?
That's a great question. We're kind of thinking about that too. As we start making these changes that are right on paper, how do we really get the community to change the way that they interact with the spaces in real life? And so, I think it starts with education is a huge piece before behavior can change. People really need to know what this place means and its significance to Native people. And so we're doing a lot of programs around helping educate the community around Dakota culture, history, and sacred places in the Twin Cities, which there are others, outside of this, Wakan Tipi and the burial mounds. There are many others within the Twin Cities area that a lot of groups are working on protecting, that we coordinate and collaborate with. But, so a lot of that education is still ongoing. But I think, the cultural center that I mentioned earlier is currently under construction, and we're really hoping that once we actually have a physical presence on the site, that will really help as well, and a building that expresses and shares, a lot of the interpretation of this site from a Dakota perspective. So I think those things will help, but we have talked about how do we enforce some of these regulations, and with the city, having, I think, at the top of the hour, you guys were talking about unhoused populations in Oregon, and we have a really large unhoused population here in St. Paul and Minneapolis. And a lot of those folks tend to want to, set up their housing and their encampments within city parks. And so these sites are certainly part of that. So, that balance between wanting to support our unhoused relatives, and that's a real issue here as well, and wanting to protect our sacred places from further desecration or harm. So really the next step in this process is, engaging with the tribes. We're about to start working on developing a cultural resource management plan, which hasn't really been completed for the way that we're managing and maintaining these sites and the land there and the different cultural resources. The cave site that I mentioned, the gating that's on the cave right now it's currently to try to keep people out of the cave, but it's in really poor condition. And we know there are a lot of people that still enter the cave and do things that we wouldn't want people to be doing at a sacred site. So, those are some of the issues that we're trying to contend with right now in coordination with the tribes and the city.
Let's go to the phones. Clifton is listening in Albuquerque, New Mexico on KUNM radio. Hello, Clifton. Thanks for calling in. You're on the air.
You bet. I had the chance to visit the Okmulgee Mounds in Georgia, and I know that's a national park. And for me, it was curious because it was the same day that we visited the Allman Brothers graveyard nearby. And so, sort of both spiritual little attendants. But I'm curious, and I'm really pleased to hear about all the cooperative development. What is the approach to working with state parks, state mound parks, and national mound parks? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Clifton, mentioning those Okmulgee Mounds. They're near Macon, Georgia, in the southeast United States. Maggie, are you collaborating with any state parks in any of these efforts?
That's a great question. And currently, we are not, although one of the most culturally important places that we have here in the Twin Cities is called Bdote, which is the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi rivers. And this is the place of origin for Dakota people. So our origin stories have Dakota people emerging from the earth at this spot. And so a lot of cultural importance and significance to this site, and historical significance, because their first military fort in the area was set up at this place. And there was a lot of really dark history, I guess, for our people at that place as well. And so that is currently called Fort Snelling State Park, and is something that I think a lot of Dakota people are interested in working on, how we can work better or more closely with the state on that site, because that's a really sacred place as well.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. I want to go back to Ke'eaumoku. And Ke'eaumoku, we just heard from the caller and also Maggie about both state and federal partnerships with regard to parks. Do you have any partnerships currently with your Lahaina projects, state or federal?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Our responsibilities at my county, we do a lot of the cultural sensitivity training. So when we have the Army Corps of Engineers, they switch in and switch out every 30 days, some 60 days. We're required to kind of give them a full education pertaining to why Lahaina is so important. The triggers that may occur, especially when it comes to the royal compound that is high on our radars, to make sure that when the contractors come in with the big machines that, they have a huge sensitive role when they start to approach these kinds of things. So collaboration with FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, a lot of the different contractors throughout the state, as well as a lot of contractors that they contracted from the mainland, from the U.S. continent. So, thousands of people came together, and one of my responsibilities is to try to bring everybody together through protocol. Establish a code of conduct so we can more understand what everyone's responsibilities are, so we don't overstep our boundaries. We even had discussions with Advisory Council and Historic Preservations on ways and how they can help us out by lightening the 106 consultation process, so we can look at our sacred sites and have those sacred sites to be one of the hugest priorities when we come to looking at ways on how we can restore and bring a lot of these important sites back. So for us, we've established a code of conduct throughout the town to make sure that everybody complies to this code of conduct, especially when it comes to those sacred areas. Yeah.
Dozens of local residents working to restore and preserve sacred and cultural sites in Lahaina, Hawaii, and a city park in St. Paul, Minnesota, getting a whole new look and a public message that reflects the land's ongoing importance to Dakota people. We'll be right back.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org, or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer.
We're glad you're tuned in today to Native America Calling. We're talking about preserving and restoring sacred sites in populated areas. Is there a sacred or cultural site in your city? You can give us a call. Tell us about it. The number to join us is 1-800-996-2848. We had one caller, Clifton, earlier. Let's get some more calls going. 1-800-99-NATIVE. And in the meantime, let's hear another perspective from Native Hawaiian archaeologist Tanya League Gregg. She is a principal archaeologist and lead investigator for Aina Archaeology, and she consulted with those helping to rebuild Lahaina. She spoke previously with producer Andy Murphy about the importance of preserving and protecting sacred and historically significant spaces.
As an archaeologist, sometimes you wonder in your mind, what did it look like from the anchorage looking toward Lahaina prior to our modern urban environment? Following the fires, many of our important places of worship were lost. What remained were some of the historic structures from that kingdom era. And one could imagine what it must have been like to be able to see from Malka to Makai and those elements that are still there and still remained. It was a bit powerful in that respect, and in amongst the devastation. But everyone took great care because we have these layers of our history in Lahaina, and those significant sites that prior to 1778 that were areas where our ali'i lived just below the surface. So when the fires came, there was certainly a concern about what is the best way to go about the recovery process. And everyone took great care to, ensure that those who were working in the area understood what was just below their feet. Those spaces like the walls of Haliloha Church, and taking care that what remained we were able to keep, like the Baldwin House and the Reading Room. Those sites, those historically significant sites, were cared for, and those secret and significant sites that lay just below the surface were also cared for as well.
How important is it to make sure these places are preserved, especially in urban areas?
As a Hawaiian archaeologist who lives on Maui, having these spaces grounding us to these places and as anchors, right? And preserving them in these urban landscapes, we know that with time comes change, and with change comes different ways of settling a landscape. But these sacred spaces, these preservation areas anchor us to our history in this space, but it fortifies that foothold of community, not just in Lahaina, but everywhere across Maui. What is left is the best of what is left. And it's those sites, whether they are coral blocks that were once a part of Ho'opilikane's two-story coral home, or agricultural terraces that spoke to an incredibly prosperous and resilient Hawaiian living culture. All these spaces and what is left anchors us to the landscape. It anchors us to these spaces. And that's just from my own personal interaction with these spaces, with these landscapes, and seeing the shifts of our urban environment, knowing that we need to maintain these places, not just for our sense of place, but to hand down to our keiki and our children as a look back to see, because it's more than just something on a piece of paper that's in a book, that's in a library on a shelf, right? This is the library that we get to see every day and get to interact with every day. And so in those respects, these very special places absolutely need to be preserved. They are the best of what we have left. And I know that there are ways to work with that and integrate that into our modern urban environments. I've seen it. I've seen it in Hawaii. I've seen it across Europe. And I know that it's not impossible.
That was Native Hawaiian archaeologist Tanya Lee Gregg. Maggie Lorenz, I want to go back to you here, because listening to a Native Hawaiian archaeologist, and just our caller earlier, Clifton, as well, from Albuquerque, I think there's a lot of Native people in Albuquerque that would say, you know what, the whole city of Albuquerque is a sacred site. I imagine there are Native people in the Twin Cities would say all of the Twin Cities are a sacred site. It really begs the question, how are you able to pick and choose in those situations? How do you place the priorities?
Right. That's such a great point. And, from my perspective, not as the leader of like this nonprofit, but as a Dakota person, I mean, the entire Twin Cities is unceded Dakota land. This is stolen Dakota land, the 1805 treaty territory that was established at Fort Snelling, which encompasses most of the Twin Cities, was never ratified by Congress. It's legally not a treaty. And so this is unceded Dakota land that we're on here in the Twin Cities. And in addition, the main way that we traveled here in Dakota territory was by canoe. All of our communities were established on the rivers. And so, this area through the Twin Cities, which is, a big urban area for Minnesota now, prior to colonization, this was like our big area, for trade and for coming together for ceremonies. And this was just a nexus point here in this area. And so we have a lot of culturally important places. We have a lot of sacred sites and burial sites. And how do we prioritize those things? I think it kind of really comes down to capacity is what it is. As an organization, we're really heavily focused on protecting and restoring the site at Wichahapi and Wakantipi. And there are so many other culturally important places in the Twin Cities. We have an organization that we kind of refer to as our sister nonprofit called Owamani Omani Okoriapi, and their mission is to protect another culturally important and sacred place, which is the now known as St. Anthony Falls in Minneapolis. But Dakota people call that place Owamani Omani. And there are a lot of cultural and stories about the importance of that place. And so they're really focused on restoring and preserving that place. And so there are a number of kind of constellation of places within the Twin Cities urban area, but really it's this entire kind of landscape along the rivers here that is sacred to Dakota people, and these are our homelands. And so picking and choosing is hard, and I think part of that too is these designations, when we talk about even nominating the site that we're currently working with to the National Register of Historic Places, it's like we have to have these boundaries of what is the sacred site. And that's not, from an Indigenous perspective, something that, you can even put boundaries on. So it becomes really challenging, but, we're doing the kind of best we can with the situation we're in. And I think making progress in that way, but, I agree that it's all sacred land. It's all Dakota homelands, and this entire Twin Cities is really unceded Dakota territory.
Maggie, we still need to talk about the construction of a new cultural center that's underway right now. Tell us more. When will it open, and how will it complement the mounds?
Yeah, so we're really excited about having a place to work from here at this site. So it'll be at the entrance to the Wakantipi site. And it's really a beautiful building that was designed and developed in consultation with the 4 Dakota tribes and a steering committee of Dakota people here in the Twin Cities. And so every element of this project was really community driven. And so construction is just wrapping up now. We should be moving into the building for our offices later this month. And then we're planning a grand opening in the spring. So, really what we're hoping to do is that ultimately, as some of the kind of recreational amenities are removed from the mound site at the top of the bluff, right now there's areas for picnics and barbecues, and there's a playground and all of those things where these burial mounds are. And so over time, once those amenities are removed, there are some of those things that could happen at this cultural center, family gatherings and things like that. And we're really working with the city to try to identify other city parks that we can invest in within the area, so that neighbors and community members have other places to go for those types of recreation. I mean, there's like basketball courts up there and tennis courts that, that's not appropriate to have at a cemetery. So finding other places in the community for those things. But, I think the Wakantipi Center is going to be really a unique and kind of first of its kind in the Twin Cities place where you can come to learn about all of these culturally important places in the Twin Cities, and hopefully gain a better understanding and treat these places with more respect.
Thank you, Maggie. Ke'iomoku, I want to go back to you. And we have listeners in partnering stations all across the United States. Many different tribal communities tune into the show every day. And some of them might be thinking, geez, there's an adjacent city near us, or there's an urban area not too far away, and we have sacred space there. We have strong, significant cultural connections to some of these lands. What's your advice for any Native people in cities where there are sacred sites that want to get those areas adequately recognized like you have done in Lahaina?
I think it's really important that we really engage ourselves with the government, especially for the city as well. So the city just previously gave us an ROE, the right of entry to one of the sacred sites here. And we've been cleaning this area and trying to get the vibrance back in this area. This area was known as Moku'ula. It's an inland island, and this is a sacred spot. So, you know, a lot of work that we've done in the past, especially with climate change, a lot of our burials started washing into the ocean. So, like Haneo Maui, ourselves, we took a positive, proactive role by getting involved and engaging with the state, Historic Preservation Division, as well as the county, on ways on how we can turn open park spaces into cultural sensitive areas. So I think one of the biggest problems when you call a property a park, it's defined as a park. So previously we were able to bring back the old name of the site, as well as create a positive code of conduct to make sure that people know that this park is no longer a park. It's a cultural preserve now. So it's just many ways on how we need to really engage ourselves so people see the bigger picture on how these areas need to be preserved and protected, especially when a total of 17 boxes of bones washed up along the shores of Lahaina. Haneo Maui really took 100% effort on making sure that the right thing is done to secure these areas, to put up signage so people understand the lay of the land, so they can respect these areas. There's incidences where tourists came down and they actually took skulls from the beach, and not realizing that when they went back to the hotel that, you know, they had to call the police department to pick up the skull. And these are kind of things that we deal with every day when we're dealing with tourism, for one. Our lands are being pretty overpopulated. So ways on how we need to collaborate with the general community as well as the tourists by working with the GMs from the hotels. A lot of the general managers from the hotels see the bountifulness and the responsibilities of not only being a host culture, but being involved in the process of protection and preservation of our sacred sites and areas.
We have time for one more question. And you mentioned the code of conduct earlier, and just hearing this story about people grabbing bones. Tell me more about this code of conduct. Is it a list of basically guidelines or do's and don'ts about what tourists or what outsiders should be thinking about when they approach these lands or when they travel over them, when they visit?
Yeah, so we've been having a hard time in town, especially when tourists come into the burn area. So we've been putting up signs to have people understand that this area still has hazards that exist. You know, a lot of the toxins and the ashes that are airborne, those kind of things they need to consider. So we literally took to heart on what people need to understand and why, especially knowing that our whole town doesn't have any facilities for communities. It's been hard for us, especially when the tourists come into town and our contractors are working at the same time. So one of our responsibilities is we've literally have to educate people every day. Every day we make our rounds, and, you know, we even let the state know that maybe there should be something placed on the airlines when the planes land to talk about those code of conducts on what can be done, what cannot be done, certain areas that you need to stay away from because of hazards exist. A lot of the freestanding buildings that some of them can actually collapse. So it's been hard, but with the code of conduct, at least we open a different parameter of things that people need to be cautious about. And it's working, especially for the park areas where we had to establish a code of conduct, letting everybody know that it's a burial preserve. It's no longer a park.
That is all the time we have for our conversation today. I'd like to say thank you to our three guests, Maggie Lorenz, Ke'o Mokuku, Kapu and Tanya Lee Gregg. And please join us again tomorrow for another conversation. We'll talk about the loss of U.S. foreign aid and how it is impacting Indigenous people outside the United States. I'm Sean Spruce. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Chas baqani, chas chwawichums, hetchinshitums, walqais walquilt. Shquilquil tausend, liwanin kaliuk such Maria, cooks yo onum discaca emswait. Wanecht sme, quiz chwiment healthcare.gov/coverage. Watch Quilquil tausend, 1-800-318-2596. Tli as Mami in Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.